Hello and welcome to A Mechanic Plays My Summer Car. Eventually we'll build something that looks like this. But for now, it looks like this. So, today we're going to start with the engine. And we have the engine block here. And this is the main body of the engine. We're going to start by building this up today. So the first step we need to do is this thing needs a crankshaft. Now in the real world there's a lot of other things that you need to do beforehand. But this is just a video game. So we just plonk it in there like that. Flop straight in. You see the tick. Then we need the bearing caps, the main caps. So, number one goes at this end of the block. Sorry, number three goes at this end of the block. Two in the middle. And one at the other end, which is the back of the motor. Then, now these use a number 10 spanner. And we're just going to next we get the pistons. Now when you'd remove a piston, you'd label it 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case, it was clearly done when it was taken out. 3 and 4. So normally you would install it like this. You'd select your piston, so number 1, go up the front of the engine, and you'd lift it up and slide it straight down in the hole. But you don't need to do that, it just snaps right in. Now we'll turn the whole thing back over, and we'll do up the nuts. These take a, as you can see here, we've got a number 6, 8, so these are number 7. Once again, tightening them right down. And you can also have things which means you like check clearances. Now that is done, it's time to put the crankshaft in. We could put the sump on now, but we'll do that a bit later. As you can see, that fits in here. 2 bolts at the front of the motor. These bolts are 5s. That's interesting stuff. Alright, now let us put the sump or the oil pan on. Now one thing to remember is to do the sump plug up, so when you fill the car up with oil, it doesn't just come pouring out the bottom. So these are a size 7. Again, there are a couple of bolts here at the front that actually bolt to the timing cover down here, which we'll worry about once we've got the timing all set up. But for now, we'll just do the rest of the bolts up. Alright, now that they're done up, let's get the timing gear set up. So we have the timing chain. The camshaft here. And the crank gear is already fitted, as you can see there. So we'll start with the camshaft gear. Now if you look on these two, you have a line here and a line here. So what we need to do is we need to time the camshaft to the crankshaft, so that the intake and exhaust valves open at the correct time. So what we need to do is once we've tightened this down, you keep turning it and it'll actually start spinning this here. You need to line this up, this line, and this up with that line of the block. It should make a complete straight line between the two. Now this is a size 10 bolt. Just screw this in. And as you can see, now that it's tightened up, it is spinning this whole camshaft here. So we'll just spin it around until it lines up. As you can see there, it's a nice straight line between the two. We'll get our timing chain and plunk that on. Once again, in the real world, you'd be tensioning this up, but there's no tension to be had here. Time for the timing cover. On that pops. So firstly we'll do the two 7mm bolts up from the sump. And now that that's done, we'll do the several 6mm bolts for the Alright, now we've got the timing cover all bolted up. We can start to think about some of the other things we can put on. So at this point there's a couple of options. We can start to piece together the clutch assembly, or we can start to put together the front drive assembly, so the alternator and water pump and that kind of stuff we can start to bolt on. Or we can even go to the head and bolt the head on. I think we'll start with the head and we'll go from there. So first step, we've got our cylinder head here. There's no running gear on this currently, so we need to get our rocker shaft, which I'll plonk that on there. So what this does is it takes from the camshaft under here, there's some push rods that will come up here, which will rock these to the up and down. You can see from there. What that does is they will open the valves, and then the spring just there will close the valve again, allowing combustion gases to exit and fuel and air mix to come in. So we need to tighten these down. These are an 8mm bolt. In the real world, you wouldn't tighten it down all the way in one go, because you have the risk of snapping the camshaft. So you could screw it in as far as you can by hand, and then evenly from side to side, start a little bit in the middle, out, 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 trying to make sure you don't bend the camshaft at all. So now that it's done, we don't put that on straight away, as there needs to be a gasket between this surface and this surface under here. As if there's not, it will not run properly, combustion gases will escape. So for that, you have the head gasket. That bolts on there. Sorry, it doesn't bolt on, it sits there. This bolts on here. Now we'll just turn this on the bench to give us some easy access. Now these are a 7mm. Once again, in the real world, you would be tightening these down in a pattern. So it starts in the middle, you tighten it down to a certain torque setting, and then you'd work your way out, bolting it down evenly so you don't end up warping or twisting it down, causing any damage. And then usually you have another 2 settings, once again following that procedure. Alright, now that it's done, we can think about putting the rocker cover or the valve cover on. Here's our rocker cover. Now, you'd either be putting a rubber gasket, a cork gasket, or a bit of sealant between these two to prevent any sort of leaking. These are also a 7mm bolt. Hello?
ensin. Se on tohon vaikka isänti kun soittaa. Kun semmoista on mun asia, että tuo lääkäri kahtoi, kun mulla oli tuo syvä halavio, niin enää ei parane töitä paljon tehdä.
Okay, now at this point we will put on some of the accessories. We'll start with the oil filter, as that is a nice and easy one to do. Goes on there, and you just need to spin it on by hand, no tool needed. Once that is done, we will put the distributor on. Now this goes in this here, this little gear on the end. Ooh, just here on the end, you can see there. That little gear meshes with the gear on the camshaft through this hole right here. There it is. And you'll see, if you look nice and closely, oh that's too close. There's an adjustable slot here, as you can see, that it means you can adjust the ignition timing of the vehicle. For now, we're just going to lock it in place, and we'll come adjust that a bit later. Following that, we will install the crank pulley. That goes on there. Now this one is a size 12, sorry, size 11. There's the size 11 bolt, so we wind that one all the way in. Next we'll install the water pump. You can see that swirl section just there. The water pump bolts onto that. Alright, now this one is a size 7. Screw that in there. Wind that all the way in. Now that's in, we can install the pump pulley. These are also size 8. It's best practice in the real world to have the drive belt on and tightened before trying to fully tighten these down, as you'll find that this pulley will just spin. So there's not much resistance with the water pump. We need to install some spark plugs that I have yet to run to the store, so we can't do that just yet. So we will start working on the transmission. Okay, so the first step before doing anything else is we put this engine plate on. So what this does is it closes off the outer wider world to the inner face of this transmission, which is also where the flywheel and clutch assembly is. So the next step is to install the flywheel. Now the flywheel is installed, we tighten them up. This is once again a 7mm bolt. Like you would for a lot of other things in the real world, you tighten this down in a crisscrossing pattern. Tighten this down evenly. And just go through and check that they're all tight. Yes. Alright, now at this point you want to install the clutch assembly. Now in the real world you would have a clutch alignment tool, and you would line up the clutch disc on that, and that has a matching spline. So if you look closely at the clutch disc, you can't really see that in this. There's normally a spline in there. That is what drives the transmission. And what that does is it aligns the clutch disc perfectly to this little hole in here. As this clutch disc is mounted on the shaft that comes out of here, which is what keeps it central, whereas the pressure plate and the cover plate are bolted to the flywheel. So you can see here on the pressure plate there's a nice smooth surface, as well as here on the flywheel. However, this game is not real life, so we need to assemble the clutch assembly. So first we have the cover plate, which connects to the pressure plate. Now that is together, we can add the clutch disc into that assembly. As you can see, once again, just sits in place. And then that bolts to the flywheel. Now these bolts are a 6mm size, so we'll bolt all of these down. Alright, starting to look fairly complete. Let us bolt the gearbox on. So this is easiest to do upside down. Bang, just like that. And this hole here is the accommodation for the starter motor. Now the bolts here are a 7mm in size. Now, these ones here are for the inspection cover as well. So let's just chuck that on there before we forget. There we go. Fold down, fold down. We've also got a larger bolt here, which is for the connecting where the differential here bolts onto the engine block. This bolt is a 10mm, so we'll screw that one in now. Boom, that is in. So that is now the gearbox attached to the engine block. Now that that is attached, we can put the drive gear, which is just the selector, in. Bang, there that goes. Now these are 6mm bolts. In they go. This is actually the clutch throwout lever, I believe, looking at the slave cylinder just here. Once again, don't forget to do that nut up as well. So what this does is it transfers force from the pedal through the master cylinder here, through clutch line, which is this one here, to this slave cylinder, which then converts it back into a physical force, pushing this lever or pulling this lever. I'm not quite sure how this setup works, thus pulling the clutch in and out of the clamp. So now we will attach the starter motor. We'll leave the wiring loose so that we don't have to worry about loosening that back off later. So for most starter motors, there's a lower bolt and an upper bolt, and that's pretty much all that holds them on. These bolts are 7mm in size. Starter motors are quite simple piece of technology. They are literally just an electric motor, very powerful one at that causes the whole engine to spin, and they also have a solenoid which causes the drive, which is shaft, which is in here, to engage onto the teeth on the flywheel, and then when the engine's already running, the solenoid turns off, the shaft retracts away from it, so it's not constantly being driven. What this basically does is it gets the engine spinning so that the engine is able to just put some fuel in, put some spark, and away it goes. Alright, now that the transmission is bolted on, we will finish bolting on a couple of accessories. So there's the fuel pump here, which goes in this hole. This is driven off the camshaft and is a diaphragm type pump. So basically, there's a little lobe on the camshaft, and that pushes a lever in here, which makes a little diaphragm pump up and down, and is how it pumps fuel. These are 7mm bolts. Just screw the two in, and that's all you need to worry about on this side for now. So there's a couple of things to be installed over here. We still have the alternator to install. Come on. There we go. So 7mm bolt here for the adjustment arm at the top. At the bottom we have a large bolt here. Excuse me, a large nut to tighten down there. And then there's also the adjustment screw. So we'll need the screwdriver to do that. We'll just do this up for now. And we'll come back to it. You still need to go pick up a drive belt. This large nut at the back is a 10mm. So I'll screw that in, that's all done. And now we look to install the exhaust manifold, or the header, and then also the intake manifold and carburetor assembly. So we'll start with the headers, as they have a lower portion. So on these early cars, they used the exhaust gases and the heat of the exhaust to warm the car up at idle. You can see just there, just in the mornings to help warm them up a lot quicker. Modern cars actually use coolant, which goes into the throttle body. There are actually two little coolant lines that run from the, usually just by the thermostat, so just sort of here, the two small lines that would run to the throttle body that are used to regulate the temperature, which really helps a lot of cars in cold weather. It can also help to cool some down to a certain extent in extreme hot weather. Right now that those headers are bolted on, let's install the intake manifold and carburetor assembly. Beautiful. It's starting to look like an engine assembly. Alright, that's all there is to do on the engine for now. That's where I'm going to leave this episode. And next time we'll start putting the front drivetrain assembly together, and the front suspension and subframe and all that, so we can bolt this engine in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.